And there we are. Good morning, everybody. We are live. Congratulations. You made it through the week. Another week of fantastic food safety, food quality, amazing breakfast burritos, all kinds of yummy food that we take for granted. And if nobody else says this to you this week, because what we do in food safety often goes unheralded, Doug, PV, and I are going to say it here today. Thank you. We appreciate all the wonderful things that you do for us. Much obliged. So if you're new to the chat here, welcome. Pull up a chair. This is the Food Safety Chat. And every week at this time, 8 a.m. Mountain Time, 10 a.m. Eastern, we go live on YouTube, LinkedIn, and X, and we discuss all things food safety. And what you'll notice with this chat is this is not a presentation. This is a fantastic opportunity because I get to bring amazing experts on, and we just have a chat. And we're here for you. And the best part of the chat is exactly what it is. It's a chat. So with that, we have amazing audience participation in what we do here, and it makes it all worthwhile. So as people are starting to file in here, good morning, Larry. Yes, thank God it's Friday, indeed. And so with that, one of the traditions we have here on the chat is let us know where in the world you are at. And I am Loveland, Colorado. Well, that's terrible spelling. So as people start to file in here, good morning, Larry. Yes, thank God it's Friday. Oh, getting a bit of echo there. That's okay. We'll work through that. And Cara is here. Hi, Cara. Good to see you. Allie in rainy North Carolina. That doesn't happen very often. Doug is in, I see here, in beautiful California. And we have another guest. We have a three-fer here today. So we have also Dr. Purnendu Vasavada, PV, who is in an undisclosed location in a bunker. We've got him hidden away, and if we showed his picture, it would actually give it away, so we cannot have his picture. So we're being safe here. So, gentlemen, how's your day going so far?
Fantastic. Good to be here.
I'm in the FDA Witness Protection Program, so I'm not allowed to. Camera is not working.
And Jose is here, and Steve. Oh, we have an amazing audience. So I think this part of this is just because I think the audience knows who we have here. So if you have been involved in food safety, food quality for any period of time, the two gentlemen here today, you definitely know. So we'll get the introductions going here as well. So Dr. Douglas Marshall, Chief Science Officer at Eurofins North America, and Purnendu Vasavada, Professor Emeritus with the Wisconsin River Falls. And he's also the principal consultant at PCV and Associates. And these two gentlemen here have an amazing historical background relative to food safety, and they've been very influential. If you have happened to take a PCQI course with FSPCA, there's a lot of letters there. PV had more than a little bit of a hand in that documentation in there, so we're very grateful for the expertise associated with that. So look at all the people coming here. Duncan, good to see you here as well. So one of the things that we love to do here on the chat, guys, to get started, is we share a cup of your favorite beverage. So we'll trust PV's got here. So cheers.
Should I describe what I'm raising?
Yes, please do. Let's get a good visual going here.
It's a beautiful ceramic mug.
Full of raw milk?
No, it's not a raw milk. It's a Nescafe.
Ooh, yummy. So with our chat here today is a really, really cool chat. And this is something I'm really excited about and I'm looking forward to. And this is definitely something we want to do with audience participation here today. In that between the three of us, and I've got my share of gray hair here. We've done a few things here in the food industry. And what we wanted to do here, Kantha, good to see you. Yeah, we're having a bit of an issue with PV's camera, getting that going. So unfortunately, we won't be able to see his beautiful visage, but be rest assured he has the long flowing hair going and he's looking absolutely fabulous. So pull up a picture of him online, do a search, and then use that as a surrogate for PV's picture. But I think, guys, one of the things as we get into our topic here, it's really easy to kind of forget where we've been and how much progress we've made over time. And if you've been in the food industry for any length of service, you know that there's a lot of different things that have been happening in the food industry. I think, in a lot of ways, looking backwards and seeing what we've accomplished and can help us provide a pathway forward as well. And with that, we kind of wanted to do a retrospective on here. So as we're going through the chat here today, guys, put in the comments things that you think have been significant in the food industry and have really shaped your career as well. And let's kind of have a conversation around it. So with that, we're kind of, I'm just super anxious here to kind of get diving in here as quick as we can. So we'll kind of do a roundtable with this, and I'll call on our guest here today for answers relative to this. So we'll start with you, Douglas. So as we kind of look back over food safety over the last 30 years, what really sticks out for you as the most significant milestone?
Well, I was one of the first people who had the privilege of working on ways to control Listeria monocytogenes in dairy plants. And we did some very basic science on just what makes that organism tick and why is it so difficult and challenging to control. And I got to tell you, this is a very clever bacterium, because 30 years later, we are still seeing outbreaks and recalls in that industry sector. So either the science hasn't caught up to the microorganism, or us mere humanoids simply are being outsmarted by an ordinary garden variety bacterium that exists in the environment, and we have to live with it. So that's my thought.
Both of those things are correct. Both of these things are correct. We have not caught up, and science is developing. But from my standpoint, Brian, the genomic testing, whole genome sequencing, and those kind of things has a earth-shattering or watershed moment, because now you can link the outbreak strain with the strain you found in the drain, and then Department of Justice works hand in hand with the public health. I've never seen this before. And one thing we would probably touch on it a little bit later, hopefully, that we always have, every so often, can we have a one food safety agency? How many times you heard that? And if we have one safety agency, I hope that there is a Department of Justice element in there too, because there are a lot of people coming in the food industry who have no idea their left hand from the right hand. And the food safety is going to be question mark with all the new products and whatever we're doing.
That's a really good point. So definitely the technology side of it's an interesting dynamic that we're seeing, isn't it, between the two? Because to Doug's point as well, is we have these emerging risks and these new types of threats that are identified. We have new tools, but in a lot of ways, gentlemen, the regulatory side versus the technology side doesn't quite match up. So FDA gets these brand new toys to play with, and then they're not quite sure what to do with them. And we're seeing this more and more. And we've talked about this on the chat before, where FDA wants us to go and do environmental monitoring and look for these things and use these tools to get that fingerprint for that particular strain that we're finding in our plant. And then they turn around and use that to whack us on the head and say, oh, you have a strain that you haven't eradicated from your plant. Congratulations, you get a warning letter. That seems like a real disincentive. What's your opinion on that, guys? How about you, Doug?
Yeah, in a perfect world, every food manufacturer would be spending the bulk of their EMP dollars testing Zone 1 surfaces, because a lot of food companies are manufacturing facilities that are not in great shape. They do have a harborage site in their drains. The key is keeping it off of food contact surfaces and out of food. I think if you can demonstrate you're doing that, that should be sufficient to keep an FDA investigator at bay. Unfortunately, we see warning letters written up for a single observation of a listeria in a floor drain. So you're absolutely correct that the regulatory climate, despite what they argue, everybody should be doing genotyping of every isolate that they have. Industry just is not in a position to be able to take that risk. So the regulators have a big role to play here. and they're just simply not allowing industry to take care of business the way industry can.
That's a good point. PB, what are your thoughts around that?
Well, my thoughts are very simple. You don't get a mulligan for food safety. It's easy to say that I found a positive and they beat me up with a 483. But if the positive was linked to somebody's kid dying, then all the bets are off. And the trouble is you can never say what is what. All right. Other thing is, my favorite topic to pounce on is what is next. I mean, we bouncing on the listeria. Suppose we eradicate a listeria completely, like we did smallpox. That is not gonna solve our problem because there's something else gonna pop up. The development of pathogenesis in bacteria, something that is very common cell, something that is very normal E. coli, Rodney Dangerfield, that doesn't get any respect. All of a sudden, it will get some mobile genetic element, and it becomes the enterohemorrhagic E. coli.
Yeah.
This is why it's a great time to be a microbiologist, PC.
It is. But the trouble is, now that you mentioned that, Doug, microbiologists is a dying breed. There are not too many microbiologists out there. You ask your company how many people, and if they have a microbiologist, they are in the upper echelon of the company.
Ooh,
they are not doing the daily interpretation. They're not doing the testing. They're not calling the shots in that regard. So there's a dearth. There's a knowledge gap there. Anybody who can walk in from the street, all of a sudden, I have a swab, and Doug told me how to take the swab, so I'm a microbiologist.
That's a really good point, because when I started off in the lab as a microbiologist, that's all I did was plate, right? You were spending your day plating for salmonella and using HEXLD, BSA augers, looking for salmonella colonies. And to your point, Vivi, that took some interpretation and some skill. You had to be able to look at the plates and see what was going on and decide what colonies to pick and what was worth looking at, what wasn't. That's artistic, for lack of a better word, side of what we do in microbiology is disappearing. That's a really good point. So now it's, okay, take this sample, put it in this broth, incubate it for a day, throw it in the ELISA machine, and it gives you a result. Oh, okay, and report out on it.
That's not even as bad as throwing in the black box and the bioinformatics spits out the answer. You have no idea. So it's whatever the algorithm you have built in there. And then if we take a leap forward and go to the Chat GPT kind of thing, I don't know. My head is spinning as to where we're going. Right now, if you have interpretation, at least you can call Doug and say, your lab sent me this report. What does it mean?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. So just the interpretation of that information. So if you're looking at an environmental issue, to Doug's point, are you identifying one type of bacteria? Are you finding multiple type of different strains or different subspecies? What are you actually looking at? What is that big picture? It's more than just that test. Let's see. So we have some great conversations going on here. So Cortland, good morning, Cortland. We got a conversation going here between Larry and Cortland, which we're jumping in, where people are not being held accountable relative to these standards, and they're asking for some clarification relative to this. I'm jumping in on the conversation, guys, here. So if you have a question for us, for Doug or PV, this is a fantastic opportunity. So drill down for those particular questions, and I'll get those in the conversation. So that technological advance, I agree, has been amazing. And the follow-up piece of it is how do you actually regulate against those? So to PV's point, perhaps at some 0.5, 10 years in the future, maybe even sooner, what do you need people in the lab for? Maybe you just have the AI system that is interpreting that data and sending out the reports, and there's nobody actually there.
I'll give you an example of something I worked on last night with one of our customers. So FDA had conducted a super swabbing event, and no, I'm not going to tell you who or where or what. And they found about a 3 to 4% hit rate, all on zone 3 surfaces. So floor drain and table legs. And they sequenced the isolates that they pulled out of those positive enrichments. And they published those sequences. It doesn't take very long to have your bugs and their whole genome published on the NCBI database. And so you have to go do some discovery work to find these sequences, because FDA doesn't say, here you go, here are your sequences, good luck. They're just kind of there out in the public space. Now, you could query those sequences against outbreak strains, but again, that's not an easy task. So here's where, Brian, to your point, AI, where some of these intelligence tools, if you could just do a very simple query on Siri while you're on that web page, hey, compare these sequences to outbreak strains. And then in short order, you would get popped up. And ideally, the result would be there are no other sequences in the database that match. So if you're a processor, that's fantastic news. What happens if it does match an outbreak strain? Now your life becomes much more than root cause corrective action. Now your products have potentially caused someone to get sick. So just that little piece of incredible knowledge is really hard to get for the average Joe and Jane food manufacturer. That doesn't make sense.
Yeah. Thoughts, PV?
Well, I agree with Doug in that we got the tools, we got the answers, but it's like that Jack Nicholson movie, can we handle the truth? What does it mean? And then I only think about somebody who is at the bench level or the supervisor level, get this phone call or the fax, and then he has to call the lawyer. I mean, it's like a tale of two cities. You are torn between what the lawyer wants you to do, what you want to do, which is the right thing to do, and what is prudent for the business. And it's a pretty tricky job to do.
Wow. Ethically, that's an important thing that you just brought up right there. In that, in our roles as scientists and with all this new information, there's a moral element associated with this. So we find something that is potentially pathogenic and can cause illness for people. There are different viewpoints within companies and regulatory agencies relative to that correct course of action. And as a food safety professional and someone who's helping to provide guidance in this area, you need to be one of those voices out there that's saying this is the right thing to do. We need to protect public health. Yeah, lawyers, we understand that we need to think about the company and protecting the company, but the consumers come first. And we need to make sure that that messaging from our viewpoint always comes through. Yeah,
but Brian, I have heard that talk the talk, but walk the walk is not there sometimes because it's a dollar and cents coming in the picture. I have never seen any company head honcho saying, we don't want to make a safe product. They got a posters all over the board, but then they have to do something to improve the swabbing or whatever. No, this is too much. It's not in the budget.
Yeah, it's always funny, isn't it? After a food safety event occurs, how that mindset changes.
Well, I compared that to the healthcare. Once you get a diagnosis of the cancer, there's all sorts of money you're spending towards the end of life. If you had done half as well when you were 30 and 20 and 40, you probably would have longer lifespan. But we talk about preventive mode, but we are not acting as a preventive mode.
Really good point. So part of this then, to reflect that back, is human nature. If you don't see a problem, it's part of how we evaluate things is to ignore it, right? It's I'm good, I'm healthy, and then one day you wake up and you're not, right? Everything moves slowly until it doesn't. And I think the analogy here, relative to what we're talking about with plant environmental monitoring, is the same, right? Doug knows this extremely well. If you go into a plant, he's going to find something, right? And so if he can find it, that means you can find it. So why aren't you looking for it? You need to be very proactive in these type of activities to look for those threats and circumvent them before they happen. But it's the dog not barking. It doesn't get necessarily the attention of senior management because nothing happened. And it's kind of what we talk about when we start the chat, is we recognize the efforts of groups in food safety, but it's not noticed because it didn't happen. We prevented it, and that's hard.
Yeah. There was a question in the chat, Brian. It's a pretty technical question. I don't know if you, it's related to the fidelity of sequencing. I'm happy to address that, but it's pretty deep. But it's how often, and the question is, how often are sequencing results incorrect? In speaking with FDA, they won't give an answer. I'll tell you what we do, and I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just telling you this is what we do. So there is potential for misreads in sequencing. Okay, so we know that. But because most sequencing platforms are conducting a massive number of sequencing events on a single run for a single isolate, when you piece all of those pieces together, you get a pretty good sequence. What we also know is that microbes will have a steady state of random mutations that occur in their genomes. Some are very sloppy in their DNA copying every time there's a new generation of microbes. And so you could have, maybe 20, 30, 40 SNPs produced over the course of a year of that organism growing and living in the environment. So it's the same strain, but its sequence that you get today can vary from the sequence you get out of that same strain next year. Other strains have a lot more fidelity in their copying, and they might only get 2 to 4 SNP differences over the course of the year. And so we have a general statement. If anybody wants to contact me offline, I'm happy to share you with that. But so when we make similarity calls, we're not looking for a single polymorphism difference. Strains that have, anywhere from 5, 10, 20 SNP differences, most likely they are the same strain. It's just you've got multiple clones of that strain in the environment. So it's not necessarily the sequencing technique is the issue. This is Mother Nature does her thing called natural selection and evolution. And so when you're chasing a strain in a facility, it's not uncommon for its genotype to change over time, but it still comes from a similar clone that is the resident strain in the facility. So hopefully that addresses that question.
Good. Well, that's a very good answer. And so part of that too is, the longer it's there, the more it's going to have the probability of having some type of these changes in the sequence manifest. So very interesting on that side.
But Brian, just because your mutation doesn't mean it's going to be deadly mutation. I mean, bacterial evolution works in a very, very strange kind of fashion. Sometimes they acquire genes and they adapt to succeed, and sometimes they acquire genes that adapt to die. There's always a chance that you will lose some of the genes, and if those genes are critical for virulence, then that organism is not going to be able to successfully infect you.
Right. Little known factor. This is something I learned. It kind of blew my mind. So for Listeria, so monocytogenes in particular, there are strains of LM that are not pathogenic. And it's just, if that conversation never comes up with FDA. If you have LM, that's it, recall. You got to get the product out of the marketplace, and there's no hemming and hawing about these type of differentiations.
I don't know. You mean the LM or the Listeria species? There are non infective species, but most of the LM strains are pathogenic, as far as I know.
Yeah, most. Yeah, I mean, last I heard, and this has been a while, that there were strains of LM identified that weren't, which is kind of weird. Let's see. Steve's got a comment here on recalls. recalls were prominently reacted, right? Yeah, so you would have an issue in the marketplace, and now we're kind of moving. This is a good point. We're getting more toward, instead of reacting to a recall, for example, we have a big recall going on in Canada right now with silk soy milk and Great Value with listeria on that topic, and a couple of people have died, which is terrible, which is a reactive situation. To Steve's point here, we're moving more toward a proactive approach where, for lack of a better term, it kind of you're guilty until proven innocent. We're seeing this more and more with FDA in the facilities. To Doug's point, if they're finding pathogens in the environment, they're not even necessarily saying, oh, well, we found these in your zone 2, therefore you need to recall it. And there's not even an indication that the product is compromised at that point, correct?
Yeah, and again, it's the precautionary principle at play here. It's sometimes decisions are made on presumptions in the absence of evidence, or the evidence isn't very clear. But I think that's okay, because if you have public health as your number one priority as a food manufacturer, you plan for these events, you budget for these events, you do all the preventive actions you can to not get yourself into a situation where you have to do a corrective action. And, that's called investment in food safety. So with that change in philosophy, ideally, we would see an improvement in public health in the numbers. Not sure that the numbers actually tell us that.
They actually don't tell you that. And one of the things that companies should have, if they don't have already, is a crisis management plan. We do a lot of thinking and budgeting on the actually how to do things, but it's like a dog that catches the car. What are you going to do when you catch the car? A lot of people have no idea. That's when they turn it over to somebody else.
Right. No, that's a good point. And so a lot of times people confuse your recall documentation with your crisis management, and they're not the same. So part of the way of thinking this is your crisis management is more of an all-encompassing, holy crap, we have an issue. How do we respond as a company? And you're pulling in people into that process who don't deal with it. So salespeople, marketing people, senior leadership within the company having to make decisions on information that they normally don't see. So just like any other skill,
don't forget the insurance company.
Yeah, exactly. You need to practice these type of activities. So changing topics here on this is something that's fascinating as a dairy guy. PV brought this to my attention. This is the 100-year anniversary of the pasteurized milk ordinance, isn't it?
Yep, it is, and that is the single most success story of the public health, and yet we are having all kind of problems with the milk and raw milk cheese.
Hey, PC, think of this analogy. I don't know how many of you got into a 4,000-pound missile and went to work this morning. But what kind of preventive controls has our society put into place so that we're not playing bumper cars every single day when we are on the road? So we've got stop signs, we have speed limits, we've got turn signals, we've got airbags. All of these are public health preventive controls.
And yet so many people
with
know
milk and dairy products, the one preventive control that we know works is summarily being dismissed as a public health preventive control by a lot of local and state legislators.
Right.
I don't get it. Get me a ball peen hammer. Help me understand.
No, this falls into the category of hold my beer. Because you know what it is, but I want to do this because healthy or whatever else. My personal peeve is I don't care what you do for your choice. This is the free country, or you can do whatever you want. But when you force your kids to do that, and kids get infected or die, that should be a very serious offense.
Yeah, agree. And it's the whole raw milk thing. Like me, just seems like somebody came up with a cool, clever marketing idea and said, "Hey, let's make up some stuff and say that it's healthier, whatever, and that you should be having this." And then they sell it for a ton of money. And then when the consequences come in, they're nowhere to be found. I post on this in locals all the time. Whenever I see a issue where they find listeria in raw milk and they have to recall it, we see it all the time. And frankly, guys, I'm more surprised that we don't have more food safety related illnesses with raw milk.
I have a question for the audience, if you will indulge me on this one. And I'm just very curious because I don't know the answer. If people can just put into the chat, at what age did you personally become scientifically literate?
Mm-hmm.
I would like to know that. Was it when you took a high school biology class? Was it a class you took in college? Was it when you took a preventive controls class or a HACCP class? When did you become scientifically literate? And I'll put my number in here.
Brian, I'm not saying any chats here, so you're going to have to read it for me.
Gotcha. All right. Yep. So stuff comes up here. We'll throw it on the screen, or I'll read it to you, PV. So
okay.
As we're waiting for the comments to come in here on this, so on the PMO as well, curious to get your thoughts around this, does it help or does it hurt in some ways? So for example, when I look at the PMO, it was written in the 40s and 50s, and in a lot of ways it locked us in technologically. You look at some of the equipment that is referenced in the PO, it should all be in museums, right? Babcock, oh my God, these type of tests. And we are really locked in to the HTST, divert flow, timing pump model. And there's so many new innovative ways to potentially make the milk safer. Does the PMO hurt us in that way? And then it locks us into that old technology.
Well, Brian, there are a lot of the artisan cheese makers and small processors that don't have a HTST equipment, but it's perfectly okay to the double boiler or the batch type of processing. It's the time temperature, as simple as that. And as you follow that works okay. So I don't think you want to force everybody to have a HTST thing.
Well, what about like other type of new emerging technologies like high pressure or UV or other things like that, Pete? What do you think about those?
But there's a lot of research going on, but I'm not sure of any commercial application except for HPP. There are some HPP available.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that HPP is becoming more widely used across a bunch of different product lines. But sometimes we've run into scenarios where if you have a high enough microbial population in the product, then that portion of that population might defeat the HPP process. And we know, for example, from the literature, that Listeria seems to be more resistant to HPP than Salmonella. So again, if you're using lower quality raw materials going in that have high microbial loads, then you might have issues with spoilage or perhaps pathogen survival with a process. So people need to think about when they're validating, how much of a log kill do you really need? And that's where you need to do your research on your microbial counts in the ingredients going in. I do want to circle back here real quick. I want to thank everybody for throwing a number in, and what is interesting to me, and I'll tell you what my conclusion is. A lot of people are saying, 20s, 30s, 40s. Some people say I'm continuing learning. I get that. So am I. Anybody know what the average age of a sanitation supervisor is in a food manufacturing plant?
85.
Here it is. Yeah,
85.
Right.
What is it?
So I have no idea, but I'll guarantee you it's not 30 years old. And so again, we have people who are responsible for one of the most critical preventive controls you have in a food manufacturing plant that probably have not come to the age of understanding of why they're even doing what they're doing because of a lack of science literacy.
And Doug, my other point there is that you start a newbie on a sanitation shift, and when the guy gets good, you promote him to the day shift. You hire your most inexperienced people, or if somebody is getting out of line, you move them to the sanitation shift as a punishment. So there's a different kind of incentive, I guess, for people.
So PC, here's a historical question for you. Who was the inventor of the concept of putting sanitation in the third shift?
Well, because you process, you look at your process description. We do this, and this for first 9 hours, and then we have a 3 hours or 4 hour sanitation shift.
But
Before you get to the next
understood,
day.
But a lot of companies are running 2 shifts, and then their third shift is a sanitation shift. Why wouldn't you start with your sanitation shift?
Well, one way to look at
do it in the morning, and do your production shifts in the afternoon and the evening.
Well, you could do that, but look at the other way around. The sanitation shift for today is the first shift for tomorrow. There's a very little time in between.
Yeah, but wouldn't that help you recruit talent to your sanitation crew and get more permanence in that talent, other than going out and hiring temp workers whenever you lose people off of the third shift?
Okay, you ready for this? That's an HR function. I have nothing to do with it.
Okay, so that has nothing to do with food safety. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, and not great. Working in a food plant is hard, right? It's hot, it's smelly, and a lot of times it's not a very pleasant place to work. So as a result, you have very high turnover rates in food plants. And kids today, I feel like these kids today, they want to be influencers and be on TikTok. They don't want to work in a food plant. And sanitation then is even a rung lower than that. So, hey, guess what? Now you get to work in the food plant, and we're going to stick you on third shift, to Doug's point. The turnover is extremely high. And I think this is kind of that intersection of something we talk about a lot, which is food safety culture. To Doug's point, which is a really, really good one, is how is part of it. The why is more important. And I saw Austin's here in the chat, and that's something on the training side from a psychological standpoint that he focuses on a lot, is we don't want, in the food industry, we don't want robots. We want people who understand what they're doing and can react. And that's a major, major challenge. To PV's point is, what is HR looking for? Are we just looking for bodies to fill these things? Or are we looking for people who actually understand what they're doing? That's a huge challenge.
And the answer is yes.
Yeah. And now imagine you're in a rural plant in the middle of, Kara, Wisconsin, and you have a very limited group of people that you can pull from. Trying to get good workers is a major, major challenge in every operation.
Yeah, but Brian, I would tell you one thing from personal experience. Third shift teaches you more than anybody would ever teach you in any class or whatever. It's a totally different ecosystem. Different workers, different sort of thing. And I would have never learned how to drive a stick shift. It was not for the third shift.
I agree. And I would say for me, to answer Doug's question, for me, I would say, my scientific awakening occurred with my first job, where you're actually, to your point as well, Pete, actually doing stuff and understanding the hows and the whys and applying that information. It's one of those lessons in life is gathering information is all well and good, but until you can actually apply it and use it, it's just theoretical. You need to get in there and apply it. So next topic, guys, I would say, so we got this PMO milestone, all of these things that are coming. The next big one is, of course, the Food Safety Modernization Act.
Brian,
Yeah, yes,
before
sir.
you move away from the PMO thing, I think one thing you mentioned that PMO was written, about 1925, 1930s, and it has not been changed much. That is not true. Every 2 years, NCIMS gets together, and there are pertinent changes made in PMO. And the latest version we have is 2019, I believe, and Appendix T is the food safety preventive controls. Appendix K is the HACCP. So there is substantial changes made in PMO.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Thank you. I appreciate that. Point taken. Great comments coming here, guys. It's really, really fantastic. So we'll hop over to this FSMA topic then. So as a general thought, gentlemen, we'll start with you, Doug. The Food Safety Modernization Act and everything that was implemented and going forward, what are your general thoughts of where we're at within this process? It's been, 10 years?
Well, the big change that I've seen is the positive shift to doing more verification monitoring, making sure that your process preventive controls are under control. So times and temperatures, for example. And, technology is helping gather continuous information. It's an opportunity for AI to do the data analytics. So, if you do have employee turnovers, if you have this all automated, then the next person who sits at that desk is going to have, alerts or action things pop up on their computer screen so they can actually take care of business. The other thing that I'm seeing is the complexity of food safety plans has mushroomed. And it requires individuals with talent to be able to write plans, to be able to update plans. For a food safety manager who has to review records, my goodness, this job has just become phenomenally complex and really challenging to do. And there are too many people that are sitting in those roles that aren't prepared for the roles. So that is one of the weaknesses of complexity, is it becomes so complex that it becomes unmanageable. And so I see that every day with our customers. There's always a customer issue out there. They're looking for help because they're overwhelmed and they don't necessarily know the right direction to get a resolution.
And Doug, another problem I see is the mobility of the workforce. You train the PCQI and 6 months later, the person is gone, or 3 months later, because there's a shortage of a good, experienced people. And headhunters will knock your door down to get you to go somewhere else. And unfortunately, only way to move up sometimes in the industry is change the company.
That's very true.
That's another factor that comes in the picture.
So with that complexity, and this was kind of, with the first round of HACCP, Doug, was a big problem, right? Because everything became a critical control point and the systems were completely unmanageable because you're always out of compliance. Is that kind of what you're foreseeing then with FSMA, where it just becomes so complicated that it's unmanageable?
Well, we're currently going through that with the latest rule on traceability. It's a mess. The regulators don't quite understand what the consequences are to various food sectors. There's no common data capture platform, so everybody's making it up on their own. FDA has been agnostic. They want an electronically sortable spreadsheet. Well, if I create one that suits my needs, is it actually going to be useful to somebody at FDA who wants to do a trace back? All these monstrous questions are in play. And, the deadline's coming up and nobody's prepared. Nobody on the regulatory side is necessarily prepared. People who are obligated to have a traceability plan because their food is on the traceability list. So it's just this complicated, jumbled mess. I wish I had the answer, quite frankly. I don't.
Hasn't some group proposed to get rid of the traceability regulation?
Yeah, I think there have
There's a
been
lawsuit going on.
some legislative action to try and, at very least, get the deadline extended. But they're also asking FDA for a lot more guidance on, exactly, FDA, I remember when this first came out, Frank Giannis was waxing poetically about a certain way to capture data. Well, that disappeared because we realized that blockchain was not the solution. So, and of course, we have a bunch of third-party vendors that are clawing to try and become that data center, but no one has risen to the top, as far as I know.
Yeah, definitely. And so I think really kind of the root of this is, with this regulation, they've asked all of these different groups to come together to create a solution. And that's not how everything was set up. Everything was set up in silos. So you've got growers, producers, manufacturers, distributors, retailers. They all have their own systems and they don't link up. And now all of a sudden the FDA has said, hey, guess what, guys? You need a system that hops over all of these different type of systems and is universal to everybody. That's gigantic. And I think part of it too is FDA, to your point, Doug. Okay, here's the products that we're really, really concerned about. So fresh produce and soft ripened cheeses, and these are the things that we need to focus on first. Well, if you're a retailer, are you going to have separate systems for high risk and low risk? No, that's just an extra level of complexity. So odds are they're going to want one system, and these companies that were exempted are going to find out that from a retailer manufacturing standpoint, they're not.
Well, and we're also seeing that we can talk about retailers, but they're also now expecting all of their suppliers to be compliant with the traceability rule, even if those suppliers are providing products that are not on the food traceability list. And, from FDA's perspective, I think that's perfectly acceptable outcome of this, is to get everybody on board. So it's just, again, it's just a whole bunch of not well-conceived expectations and a lack of understanding of the complexity of beginning to even close to being compliant. Now, if you're a food manufacturer and you've got a limited SKU set and you've got traceability on your own spreadsheet, you're done. Right? Technically, you have met the spirit of the rule. But there are others that are just, distribution centers are probably the worst, where they're picking not necessarily a full pallet, but they're picking portions of a pallet. You have to trace each box or container that comes off of that pallet that goes on a distribution truck that has maybe multiple destinations, and, just how people just don't quite envision how immensely complicated it is just to trace food in one truck.
Yeah.
Let alone across the entire supply chain.
Now, I think a good example of that is another subcategory of that is allergens. So, for example, it's like, we're going to now include sesame as an allergen. It needs to be controlled as a top allergen in the U.S. And that absolutely threw those industries that have sesame within their processes into absolute chaos. So you're a hamburger bun manufacturer and you have sesame buns with sesames and buns without sesame, and good luck keeping those two things separate. And so I'm kind of curious to get your opinion on this, guys. So a lot of companies have done in those areas what was done in the food industry before. It's like, okay, well, we can't segregate this out, so we're just going to list sesame on everything. And it's limiting food choices for people. What do you think about that?
Well, FDA just wrote a warning letter to a big bakery for just that. Is they were declaring sesame as an ingredient in across all of their SKUs, and there was no sesame in many of those SKUs. So it was false labeling.
Mhm.
Yeah, but if you look from the put an industry hat on, I would rather put everything spaghetti on the wall and whatever sticks, till you get caught. There is no consequences.
Mm.
If I put the sesame on the label and there is no sesame, there is no harm done.
Well, actually, I respectfully disagree, PC. The harm is if you are a sesame sensitive individual, now your access to sesame-free
That's
foods has shrunk dramatically. Coupled with
that's
that,
the whole allergen situation.
Yeah, coupled with that, though, but the orbit of individuals that you hang out with, let's say your family unit, now they are no longer buying these products. So when you think about the world's worst marketing campaign, I think this one is number one for me because you are scaring away consumers from products that are perfectly safe for them to consume, and you are going to reduce your sales not only with that individual, but the orbit that surrounds that individual. They also are not able to purchase these products with sesame. So, that just doesn't seem like a great way to sell your product by misleading labeling.
Yeah, but compare that with the problem you will have if you didn't have on the label and somebody got sick. I mean, you're just balancing what is the way to go with a lot of expenses and recall versus somebody don't buy your stuff.
Right. Well, now we're back to what we talked about before, the precautionary principle and lawyers, right? So the lawyer's going to say, okay, fine, just put sesame on everything and it will protect the company. But that doesn't help the consumer.
Well, and think about front of package labeling. I might want to put in big, bold letters, allergen free, to attract consumers who are allergy sensitive. But think about this also. That is also going to be a strong attractant to anybody else who might not really have any knowledge. Oh, it doesn't have allergens. That's good.
Yeah.
Now all these companies are not going to be able to do that as part of their marketing campaign.
Mm-hmm.
Don't even go to gluten then.
Oh, yeah. Well, and here's a pet peeve for me on the allergen list is coconut. This is a good opportunity for me to bring this in front of you guys. Is coconut an allergen?
According to FDA, yes.
It's a tree
nut. And Brian, what you and I think doesn't make a difference. It's the scientific thinking of FDA that rules.
Right. Well, and that kind of gets into, and that's why I brought it up, is on the regulatory side, they have hindrances as well, as we've been talking about. And one of those is avoidance of risk. They have no incentive to take coconut off the list, because if they do and someone gets sick, then they're going to get blamed and they don't want to take that. So things always only progress in that one direction of adding things to the list and never taking them off.
So, Brian, in the Appendix 1 update, or no, maybe it's the PC rule, they came out with a new allergen control guidance document. Mm-hmm. And in there is a statement. I'm going to make this a similar statement. It's not the right statement, but that says that food manufacturers can do a risk assessment to be able to establish whether or not trace amounts of allergens are a food safety hazard. I'm waiting for the first company to be able to come to FDA and say, that level of peanut allergen that came in on a spice due to unintentional agricultural contamination is at a level of de minimis risk.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, we don't believe we need to declare peanut on our label. But FDA has given industry an opportunity to do that risk assessment. Don't ask me what it takes to get it past FDA, but at least they've cracked open the door a little bit.
Yeah, that's a good point. PV, what do you think of that?
I don't know about FDA, but IFSA has done some very good consultations in the last couple of years, and there were some publications out. And from my standpoint, there's always a difference between what European thinks about things and what American thinks about things. And as far as allergens are concerned, they are more sensitive in thinking, I think, than what we are.
Yeah, and so it's an interesting conundrum because our testing sensitivity relative to finding allergens has surpassed the theoretical threshold limits that have been established through groups like FARP at the University of Nebraska. Well, in general for a population. Again, now we're getting into epidemiology. You're looking at large groups. That doesn't mean that's true for every individual. So it gets back into what we try and do in food safety, which is reasonably likely to occur. And how do you evaluate that? Just becomes extremely complex, to your point, Doug.
Well, and we actually do have an example where this kind of risk assessment has been done with soy lecithin. So there's a couple of manufacturers where FDA actually lists who they are, that FDA has agreed that their manufacturing process for that ingredient is sufficient to remove soy protein. Therefore, if you use the ingredient lecithin on the label, even if it comes from soy, you don't necessarily have to call out that there's that's an allergen concern.
Good point. So we're at the 5-minute mark here. Questions time has absolutely flown, guys. So let's kind of bring this back up to the 30,000 foot level and kind of get your closing thoughts around our topic for here today and this retrospective on what we have seen in the food industry and where we see it going. And PV, we'll start with you. What kind of closing thoughts do you have for our audience here today?
Well, about 10 years ago, one of the journalist guy contacted me and wanted to know what is the thing about the new regulation of food safety, preventive controls, and all that. And my answer to him was, I didn't realize, but I at that time, it's like Charles Dickens' Tale of the Two Cities. It's the best of the time and it's the worst of the time. We have a technical know-how, we have a tools, we have a procedures. We know how to find needle in the haystacks and the metallic composition of needle. But sometimes we don't find the haystack. We find the needle, but we don't know the haystack. And so it's the best of the time in that regard, but it's the worst of the time because of our worker pool, our knowledge base, our ability to learn, relearn, and unlearn things as we need be. It's a very challenging job. I don't think the people in food industry gets due credit for the job they do.
I agree. Doug, what do you think?
Yeah, just to follow on, I applaud everybody on today's blog. You guys are the doctors in the house of a very complicated patient. And people in this profession are incredibly underappreciated by brand owners and food manufacturers. So keep reminding people that this is true. And I think if you do that and you continue in this profession, it's a very noble profession. And so I'm very proud to have spent my entire career doing this. And I know PC shares the same opinion, and so do you, Brian. And I'm pretty certain everybody else on the call today feels the same way. So, although we've seen changes in technology, we still need to clean a facility. We still need to sanitize a facility. We still need people and workers online that know what they're doing and why they're doing and the importance of getting it right.
Well said. And so it kind of comes down for me as well is the rocking chair test, which is you sit back and you're on the porch in your house and you've been retired and you're watching the sunset and you're rocking back and forth and you're reflecting on your life and you're thinking, did I make a difference? And I think in what we do, I can look back when I reach that stage of my life and say, yeah, we've been able to help make the world a better place. And to your point, guys, everybody on this call, I appreciate that. And it's why we do what we do. And passing that information on to that next generation who are coming up and helping them and teaching them from our mistakes, of which I have plenty, of how can we make things better and pushing it forward. So that's why I appreciate this call so much, and with Doug and Phoebe, that's why I appreciate you guys so much, because you have done a ton to help move that boulder up that hill a little bit further, right? So Sisyphus may have a hard time, but we're still going to keep pushing it up that hill. So thank you to everybody as well in this chat. Amazing comments today, guys. So thank you. This is heartening to have these many comments and people checking in and listening to this conversation and contributing. So thank you very much for all that you do. And with that, we'll bring our chat to a close for this week. A fantastic chat. I'm sure everybody will agree. So join us back here next week at the same time, 8 a.m. Mountain Time, 10 a.m. Eastern on LinkedIn, YouTube, and X, where we'll bring other amazing guests on this chat to have more conversations on food safety. In the meantime, have a fantastic weekend. Enjoy yourself, and we'll see you back here next week. Doug, PV, thank you very much, gentlemen.
I'm waving also, Doug, and thank you for the opportunity. This was a great chat, and Doug is such a mobile element. It's hard to pin him down, so at least you could pin him down for 1 hour. I enjoyed talking to you guys.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys, and thanks, everybody. Have a great time. We'll see you later.